During my son Ethan's high school graduation dinner, we found ourselves at a nice steakhouse that we had saved for, despite all that had happened. My parents were there to celebrate this significant milestone, as Ethan had worked incredibly hard, managing AP classes, engaging in extracurricular activities, and holding down a part-time job. He'd even been accepted into his dream college. However, my parents had a different agenda. Just after the waiter set down our drinks, my mom tapped her glass gently with a fork, smiling broadly and looking quite pleased with herself. She stood up, cleared her throat, and announced their plan to give Ethan's college fund to his cousin Jason instead, claiming he needed it more. In that moment, the atmosphere froze. Mark, my husband, tightened his grip on his fork, and Ethan's face turned pale. My younger daughter, seated next to Ethan, looked around in confusion. My dad chimed in, seemingly unfazed, as he echoed my mom's sentiment, stating it was what was best for the family since Jason had been going through a difficult time and this support would help him regain control of his life. My nephew Jason, my brother's son, had always been their favored grandchild, frequently saved from the consequences of his actions by my parents. As I sat there, simmering with years of pent-up frustration, my patience waned. Mark interrupted the tense silence swiftly. Leaning back, he sipped his beer and let out an amused chuckle, telling them that we had already moved Ethan's college fund elsewhere the previous month. My parents' surprise was palpable as my mother's expression froze and my dad's smile faded. "What do you mean?" my mom questioned, her voice now sharp. Mark, staying composed, replied, "Yes, we anticipated something like this, so the money is out of reach." At that moment, my parents erupted into anger. My mom's face flushed red with fury as she accused us of having no right, and my dad banged the table, demanding to know why we did it, asserting that the money was intended for family. Finding my voice, I stated firmly that Ethan was family, that it was his fund, and they had no authority over it. My mom labeled us selfish, insisting that Jason needed the money, given my brother's hardships. It became clear to me that they had never intended the funds for Ethan after all. They had been waiting for an opportunity to redirect it. Witnessing Ethan's reaction, devastated by their betrayal, broke something in me. I recounted their so-called efforts to fix things each time Jason made a mistake, questioning how this could justify depriving Ethan of his future. My father argued that my brother was trying his best as a single father, and I countered, emphasizing that I too was striving as a mother. They had chosen Ethan's crucial milestone to convey that his prospects meant nothing to them, effectively stealing away the promise of a life he had diligently worked for. My mom dismissed the issue, suggesting Ethan could simply take out loans for college. That was the final straw. Ethan stood abruptly, his demeanor a mixture of defiance and heartache. He declared that he wanted nothing from them, not their money, and certainly not them in his life. Mark rose as well, placing a supportive hand on Ethan's shoulder, signaling that it was time for us to leave. I stood beside them, reaffirming that this action was the end of their chances with us. As we walked out, I told my parents that they have consistently shown their true colors, but today they ensured we would never forget. They shouted after us, calling us ungrateful and accusing us of tearing the family apart. However, when I glanced at my son, who held his head high despite the pain in his eyes, I knew we had made the right decision. What I hadn't anticipated was the extent to which my parents would go to recover that money. We left the restaurant, knowing things had changed permanently, but I was unaware of how far my parents would go to retaliate. Initially, the harassment started with phone calls, endless angry voicemails from my mom, ranting about how we had betrayed the family. My dad left a few messages too, gruff and filled with anger, saying such things as, "You'll regret this." My brother, who hadn't participated in the argument that night, finally texted me 2 days later, saying, "I don't know what's going on, but Jason needs that money more than Ethan. You're being selfish." That was all, no questions, no attempt to understand, just, "You're being selfish." I didn't reply. Then the real issues began. A week after the dinner, Mark received a call from our bank while I was in the kitchen. I overheard him saying, "Excuse me, what withdrawal?" My stomach sank. The call lasted another minute or two, and when Mark hung up, His face was tight with anger. They tried to access Ethan's fund. I grasped the counter and Mark replied, "Your parents. They called the bank pretending to be us, claiming we had given permission for a withdrawal due to a family emergency." I was stunned, unable to breathe. "Did they?" Mark shook his head. "The bank flagged it, said something fell off, and called me first." I felt an overwhelming urge to scream at their audacity. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and dialed my dad's number. As soon as he answered, I erupted. "You actually tried to steal from us. What's wrong with you?" My dad didn't sound guilty. "You left us no choice. We wouldn't have had to do that if you weren't being so unreasonable." I was close to throwing my phone. "Unreasonable? You tried to commit fraud," I accused. My dad snapped back. "It's our money. We contributed to it." I was taken aback. "What?" My mom interjected. "You think you managed all of this on your own? You think we never put anything in that fund?" With clenched fists, I argued, "You never gave a single cent to Ethan's fund." My dad slyly responded, "You're remembering wrong, and if we were to go to court, I guarantee they'd say we are entitled to it." My blood ran cold, and Mark, seeing my expression, stepped closer to assure me they wouldn't stand a chance. But I wasn't convinced because my parents were adept liars, bold and manipulative. If they had gone this far, what else were they planning? Just 3 days later, we received our answer. I was pulling into our driveway when I spotted a thick envelope on our doorstep. Feeling sick, I picked it up and, upon recognizing the return address, raced inside, my hands trembling as I tore it open. Mark was in the living room. "What's that?" he asked. I skimmed through the pages, reaching the third one, where my hands shook too hard to keep the paper steady. "They're suing us," I whispered. Mark's head shot up. "What?" "They claim they co-funded Ethan's college savings and that we illegally transferred the money without their consent." With a shrill voice, I explained how they allege having a stake in the fund. Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor as he grabbed the papers, eyes narrowing as he scanned them. "This is complete, ___," he muttered. But I wasn't so sure because my parents excelled at lying and twisting reality to become the victim. What terrified me most was that in a legal battle, they might actually prevail due to the proof they claimed to have. In the following days, we scrambled to collect every piece of documentation we had: bank statements, transfer records, every deposit ever made. At the following meeting with the lawyer, my parents dropped a bombshell. They had a receipt from over 10 years ago, showing a single deposit of $2,000 into the fund when Ethan was a baby. Their lawyer argued smugly that their contribution gave them the right to challenge the fund's allocation. I nearly laughed, repeating, $200,000? You think that gives you control over the entire fund? My mom sweetly replied, "It was a contribution, and without it, you wouldn't have saved as much as you did." I was furious, but Mark stayed composed. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You believe that because you made a one-time contribution over a decade ago, you can now dictate where it goes?" My dad nodded confidently. "Exactly." Although the court eventually ruled in our favor, stating that my parents had no control over the fund, it was determined that their $2,000, along with interest, had to be returned. It was a partial victory, as they couldn't access the fund, but their determination to punish us for refusing their demands was evident and unnerving. Less than 2 weeks after the court's decision, Mark came home with alarming news. His face was pale as he reported, "They reported us to the IRS." I was stunned. "For what?" I asked. "They're accusing us of tax fraud," he explained. My heart sank as he continued. "They alleged we've been hiding money and misreporting funds for years." I was floored. This was beyond money. It was war. The IRS investigation began with a formal letter indicating a review of our finances due to suspected tax discrepancies. Mark was the first to read it, his face tense as he wordlessly handed it to me. As I scanned the document, my hands shook. "This can't be real," I whispered. Mark replied, "Oh, it's real." Soon after, we received a call from an IRS agent informing us of an anonymous tip about supposed hidden assets and fraudulent transfers. We knew who was behind it, but proving it was another matter. We spent weeks consumed by paperwork, gathering years of tax returns, bank statements, anything to clear our name. Thankfully, our finances stood up to scrutiny, but the investigation was grueling, not just for us. It impacted Ethan's financial aid. His scholarship disbursement was delayed due to the IRS review. They didn't just attempt to take his college fund, they tried to take his future. That was my breaking point. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. I started digging into my parents' past. Growing up, I watched them bend the truth, twist stories, and manipulate to get their way. Now, it was my turn. I discovered that, years ago, Mark had helped them set up a rental property investment, managing all paperwork and tax filings. Turns out, they had been underreporting their rental income for years. They thought they were untouchable, but they had been careless. I didn't report them just yet. Instead, I called my mother. She answered smugly, "Oh, so you're finally ready to apologize?" I stifled laughter. "No, I'm calling to tell you what I found." Silence enveloped the room as I revealed the truth about the tax fraud, a stark reality within this family. Her voice dripping with scorn, she questioned, "What are you talking about?" I refer to the rental income, the funds you conveniently forgot to declare for over a decade. Shock visibly struck her. "You have no idea what you're talking about." But I did know, and so would the IRS, unless she put an end to this, and stopped hounding us. Her demeanor changed immediately. "You wouldn't dare." A smile formed as I replied, "Go ahead, try me." She retreated, cutting the call short. 2 days post this encounter, the IRS reached out. Our case suddenly lacked priority. Ethan's college funds were reinstated a week later, a temporary setback for them. Though they retreated, I had no doubt they'd return, which was proven right when the home invasion occurred. It was late. Mark and I were jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass. At first, it felt surreal, but the footsteps inside confirmed our fears. Mark swiftly armed himself with a baseball bat, signaling me to dial 911. My hands fumbled, nearly dropping the phone as panic set in. A voice pierced the chaos. "Mom, Dad, Ethan?" Realization hit us. He had heard the disturbance and, disobeying, was approaching the stairs. "Stay in your room." Mark's command came too late. Just as we reached the hallway, there stood Ethan, and below, Jason stood in the living room, drunk and holding a crowbar. Tension hung in the air. "Where is it?" he demanded, slurring. Mark braced himself. "Where's what?" Jason's anguish erupted. "The money. I deserve it. They promised it to me." Clarity dawned on me. They had sent him, my parents, knowing the money was beyond their legal reach. Jason approached, raising the crowbar. "You think you can take what's mine?" Ethan bravely intervened. "It was never yours." Despite fear, his voice was firm. Jason's laugh was a bitter, fractured sound. "Oh yeah? And what'll you do?" A decisive moment came. Mark swung the bat, missing Jason but striking the wall with force, snapping Jason back to reality. He scrambled out, vanishing through the front door. The police arrived swiftly, arresting Jason for attempted burglary. Yet, before dawn, my parents bailed him out, and my mom had the nerve to call me. "You've crossed the line," she spat. "You had him arrested." A laugh almost escaped me. "He broke into our home. Armed. That's on you." Silence followed, then a chilling whisper. "You'll regret this." For the first time, I believed her. This conflict was far from over. A mere 2 weeks after that violent night, my brother reached out. Tired and worn, he implored. "It's gone too far. We need to talk. Mom and Dad are wrecks. Jason's a wreck." I almost laughed at the irony. Now he wanted to intervene? After everything, after allowing our parents to manipulate and attempt to rob my son, using Jason like a pawn. Mark persuaded me otherwise. "This might be our chance for resolution," he suggested. Reluctantly, we scheduled the meeting at our parents' house that Sunday. The atmosphere was tense, like entering hostile territory. Mark and I arrived, Ethan choosing not to come. "I'm done with them," was all he said, and rightly so. The sight of my parents offered no comfort. Sitting rigidly, their faces hostile. My father's gaze fixed anywhere but on us, my mother's lips a hard line. Then, my brother emerged, flanked by Jason. My hackles rose at the sight of him, looking drained, the usual bravado diminished. In a scene filled with tension, my mom motioned for everyone to take a seat, but I remained standing. Let's just get it over with, my brother sighed, acknowledging our collective mistakes. Mark scoffed. We messed up? I didn't mean it like that, my brother quickly corrected. This isn't what Mom and Dad envisioned. I let out a bitter chuckle. They wanted to steal from my son. They planned to use Jason to break into our home. So, what exactly wasn't part of their plan? Jason's voice broke the silence, raspy and pained. I didn't intend to hurt anyone. I just thought it was mine. His admission churned my stomach. You thought it was yours? Why? He swallowed, casting a glance at my mother, guilt etched on her face. Mark noticed it too, leaning forward with a dangerously calm voice. Explain, Jason. Why did you assume it was yours? Jason hesitated, his eyes darting nervously to my mom, and suddenly I realized, oh my God. I whispered. You told him, didn't you? My mother flinched. I turned to Jason, heart racing. They convinced you it was already yours, that Ethan's fund was never just given to you but yours all along. Jason's eyes shifted, and his face went pale. My mother interjected before he could respond. We had to, she snapped. He was struggling. Your brother needed hope. I couldn't believe my ears. So you lied to him, made him believe his future was secured with money that was never his? My dad's sharp voice cut through the tension. What does it matter? You both had good jobs, a home, stability. Jason had nothing. What kind of sister are you to watch your nephew suffer? Something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, hands trembling with rage. What kind of parents are you? Despite having 2 children, you've always treated me as lesser while he, I jabbed a finger at my brother who shrank in his seat, was given everything. Now, you expect me to give up my son's future because of your guilt. My mother stood up abruptly. We did what we had to do. No, I retorted. You did what you always do. You chose him over me, and now you've been caught. Silence fell. Jason was shaking his head, whispering, You lied to me, looking at my mom as though seeing her for the first time. Jason, she started, reaching out, but he backed away. No, you promised, he gasped. You swore I'd have no worries about college, that I'd be set. Then he looked at my dad. And you knew. His shaky laugh echoed, turning to me, breaking. I'm sorry. And for the first time, I saw it, the realization, the regret, understanding that he was as much a victim as we were. He left, and I didn't stop him. My parents tried to justify, ranting, raving, accusing me of dismantling the family. I simply stated, we're done, and meant it. My brother tried reaching out afterward, apologized, admitting he let it go too far and trusted our parents too much, but I wasn't ready for forgiveness. Surprisingly, Jason stayed out of trouble, got a job, attended a community college. Whether driven by guilt or genuine change, I'll never know, but I hoped he'd finally learned. As for Ethan, he went to the college he earned. My parents never saw a dime of his money, nor us again. Cutting off one's parents, even unloving ones, feels like mourning, but sometimes burying the past is less painful. I chose to live.
The end.